second thing that occurs when you desiccate for fifth generation bonding is your bond strengths drop through the floor. They crash. So the worst thing you can do with any of the fifth generation adhesives is to over-desiccate. If you take these fifth generations and over-desiccate the dentin, you'll have increased likelihood of sensitivity and decreased bond strengths. Okay, so it's important that you suction off the water from the preparation after you've rinsed it and blot dry. But air is actually the enemy of a fifth generation. They need a little moisture on the tooth to work effectively. And when you look at the bond strengths of fifth generations compared to fourth generations when done properly, you only see a very slight drop in averages, very slight. So a fifth generation bonder can establish essentially the same bond strengths, just a little bit lower as a fourth generation bonder, if they do it correctly in one less step. The other benefit of the fifth generations largely is unit dose. And unit dose is important because if you're using a bottle as a fifth generation bonding agent, every time you uncap and recap that bottle, the carrier, acetone, alcohol, or water, will start to evaporate off. And as the bottle ages, it becomes a less and less effective wetting agent for dentin surface. So you're likely to see the increase in postoperative sensitivity as the bottle ages. So fifth generation users will generally or should generally use a unit dose system. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about self-etching, but there's plenty of indications for total etch systems. Absolutely. And what I want you to think about as we go a little further in our conversations this evening is when you would use a fifth or sixth generation bonding agent. So what you really look at is your adherent. What are you trying to stick your resin to? What is it you're chemically bonding to? And if you think about that and look at a situation where a patient comes in with a small fracture that's solely in enamel and you intend to place a composite resin and you don't want it to fail adhesively, you need the highest bond strength you can get to enamel, simply put. There is no dentin here. And this situation here is absolutely contraindicated for a self-etcher. Now, if I were in Japan, they'd be all over me because they believe 100% that self-etchers etch everything perfectly. They don't, unfortunately. They work really well on dentin and just okay on enamel. Just okay. Now, some do pretty well, but they don't work as well on enamel. So this type of clinical situation really requires the use of a total etch system. Where we come in here, we put our 37% phosphoric acid on the tooth. If we're using a fourth generation bonding agent, we'd simply place our adhesive. In the fifth generation, we put our bonding agent, and we don't have to worry about desiccating dentin, so it can be dry, and we'll get a good adhesion. We place our bonding agent, we place our composite restorative material, we contour it, we get it in place, we polish it, and we're good to go. There are plenty of other indications where you absolutely should be thinking fifth or fourth generation adhesives. Something like a veneer situation where you're going to come in and place veneers over teeth. These are going to be two composite veneers on pen laterals in a young individual. And here we'd simply want to etch this entire enamel surface. There is no dentin. We want the highest bond strength we can get to enamel. So we'd go ahead and etch this and restore with a fifth generation bonding agent. There's other indications for these type of materials. Say we're going to bond to the incisal edge. This patient wants her incisors lengthened, and we're going to do that aesthetically. If we're going to do that, we need a very strong adhesive. This is going to be an enamel retained restoration. Therefore, we want the best of bond we can get, and we'd use a total etch system. And we'd come in here and etch and place these composite restorations. So there's lots of indications, generally speaking, in the anterior that we want a fifth generation adhesive. Where things are under a lot of lateral stresses, we want to be able to do that. However, there are some indications where you'd want logically to think about self-etchers. So if you ask any self-etcher, and my brother's a self-etcher, I practiced with him, I have for 20 years. I'm a total etcher primarily. a secondary self-etcher. He's a primary self-etcher and a secondary total etcher. And he'll tell you, I can't self-etch everything. That's ludicrous. So there's times when he's trying to bond to enamel that he's running into my room stealing my stuff. And the same thing with me. I go take his self-etching components for certain restorations. So when we talk about 6th generation bonding agents and bonding adhesives, we talk a lot about these as good self-etchers. Okay? The market leader to date has been, for years now, since 2003, a product called Clearfill SE from Carrari. It is your typical 6th generation self-etcher, very popular product, and a very good bonding agent. And as a 6th generation, it's a little different. We also have 7th generation adhesives, and these have been marketed to us to simplify our life. Remember, we had 3 steps, then we had 2 steps. Then we had a different type of 2 steps with the 6th generation, and then the 7th generation provided us with 1 step. All you do is scrub the stuff on, air thin like you're good to go. I want you to hear me. You should not use them. There is no evidence to say the bond strength you get is strong enough, and you will see the number of adhesive failures go through the roof. So, should you use the 6th? Absolutely. You want to look at when you do that. Well, in the United States, the god of dentistry is Gordon Christensen. And what Gordon says, people listen to and generally do. And in 2003, Gordon Christensen started looking at these self-etchers and total etchers and comparing them. And at the time, Clearfill, and still is, the largest shareholder of the self-etchers. What would that mean if you asked an American dentist, are you a self-etcher? And they said yes. You had a 61% chance that they were using Clearfill SE. That was it. It was dominant in the market, and it still is. When you ask total etchers, 5th generation total etchers, what they use, the total etchers were split between 3 products. The 3 biggest companies in the States, Kerr, 3M, and Dentsupply. So Primabond NT from Dentsupply, the Scotch Bond products from 3M, and Optibond product from Kerr were the top 3 products from those companies. So when you looked at the data, and this is quite interesting, Gordon did shear bond strength studies, and he took 3 of the top total etchers, which are on your screen in pink, and he compared those to both dentin and enamel to all of the self-etchers. And when he did that, what he found in his studies was that as a group, the total etchers, as a group, if you average them together, outperformed the self-etchers. However, there was one self-etcher that seemed to do really well, and that was Clearfill. So with Clearfill, you could establish a reasonable bond to both dentin and enamel using a 6th generation technique. But the rest of the products in the market really paled in comparison to the 5th generation. So what you've seen is market domination by Clearfill for the self-etchers. And these 6 generations, by and large, haven't gained a lot of popularity unless they're Clearfill, until recently. And we'll talk a little bit about what's happened recently. And these 6 generations got bond strengths that were all over the map, anywhere from 17 on dentin up to 60. Impressive. They did pretty well, but they were all over the map. And you found that Clearfill, didn't matter who tested it, did really well against any other total etch. Okay? So Kerr, having a huge reputation in the adhesive arena, recognized that if you're going to get into the self-etching field, there's only one person you need to beat. You don't need to beat Dentsupply. You don't need to beat 3M. You definitely don't need to beat GC. You could do that in your sleep. You need to beat Clearfill. That was it. They said, when we launch a product, we want Gordon Christensen to get a hold of it and say, you know what, this is as strong as or better than Clearfill, or whoever else is looking at it, whatever other university is going to do that. So they spent about 6 years in designing their self-etching adhesive, and it's called Optibond XTR. And when you look at the preliminary data